Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Crafting and Crime Daily, the show where I recap live trials. I'm doing it from my car today. I'm not driving. I'm just here because it's nice and quiet. The people in the house that I'm with, they're all still sleeping. You know, I'm an early bird. I stay up late and get up early. So I was in the backyard where they have this really pretty garden, but people are mowing lawns and, you know, the wind is going by. But oh my gosh, here I'm in Michigan and it's like 50 something degrees out. I didn't bring a sweater. I don't know why. When you're living in 97 degree heat, you just don't even think of that you might need a sweater somewhere else. But okay. I think we're moving to Michigan when it's 50 degrees in March. Or no, when is this? 50 degrees in June. Sorry, I'm tired. I did a bunch of driving yesterday to get here, and then we had dinner at a place called the Melting Pot. It's fondue. Let me just say, I don't think I'm a huge fan of fondue. I loved the dessert, though. The dessert was fantastic. And it was a fun experience, with my friends and stuff. So let's get to the trial. This is the trial of Scot Peterson, the school resource officer who was assigned to Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School on February 14th of 2018 when Nicholas Cruz entered building 1200 of that school with his AR rifle and started shooting on the first floor, second floor, and third floor, ending up killing 17 people and injuring 17 others. He is serving multiple counts of life in prison without the possibility of parole. And as the defense pointed out during their closings, he's the monster in all this. He is the one that is responsible for the deaths of those kids, not Scot Peterson. Yeah, I don't know why they're trying this guy. I really don't. If his job is to protect and serve and secure, all right, anyway, don't get me started. Okay, so she goes through the timeline and she says, he's on trial because he failed to confront the shooter. Now, the defense points out that, if he had gone into that 1200 building, he would have had to clear floors before getting to the third floor. So he would have gone through the first floor, walking past bodies, which is what they say they do when you're looking for a shooter. You just walk past the bodies. Then he had to clear the second floor. And he would have had to do that in 66 seconds when it took SWAT 30 minutes to clear that building. Because they thought the shooter was in the building too. And it took them 30 minutes. Yep. So I think that was a good point. So then she talks about the elements of the charges, the child neglect. One of the things they're going to have to do is find that he is a caregiver. And a caregiver's job is to protect and secure the school, according to the prosecutor. But the judge read the definition of caregiver, and it's a parent or another adult within the same household, or another person who is responsible for the welfare of the child. So the prosecution is arguing that Scot Peterson was responsible for the welfare of every single one of these kids. She's like, the parents, when they pulled up to that school that day, and they dropped their kids off for school, and they waved goodbye. And I'm thinking, it's high school. Nobody does that. Nobody... Well, I'm sure there are a few parents that drive their kids to school, but yeah, it sounded like she was talking about an elementary school. But, they waved goodbye to their kids, and then they entrusted their care of their child to Scot Peterson. That's a lot to entrust one man for 3,000 students to be responsible for the welfare of all 3,000 of those kids. I know, I'm very convinced he's not guilty. Can you tell? So then she went through culpable negligence. And, you can be negligent and not culpable negligence. Culpable negligence is where you act knowing that it's reasonably certain that it's an act or omission. So by not acting, you're reasonably certain that someone's going to get injured or great bodily harm. And she's saying that's what happened here, that he failed to confront the shooter. And she said the mere confrontation, she says, we didn't expect him to go in and kill the killer. We expected him to go in and disrupt the killer. Their studies show that the mere presence of a police officer in uniform will be enough to distract the shooter. And that would have saved lives on the third floor. I don't know. Then she talked about the perjury charge, which I thought was interesting. This was what happened when he was giving a sworn statement to the lead investigator of the Nicholas Cruz event. There were two lead investigators, one for Nicholas Cruz and one for this trial. And interestingly enough, the prosecution never put the lead investigator for this trial, Scot Peterson, on the stand. They put the lead investigator for the other trial on the stand to say that Scot Peterson committed perjury when he said he only heard 2 to 3 shots. But the defense countered that by saying, you have to look at that statement in context. He was being asked about what he heard when he pulled up to they were going through, well, what'd you do now? And then what did you do? And then how many shots did you hear? Well, when he pulled up to the 1200 building, Officer Medina in the golf cart, and he dropped off Scot Peterson, it was at that point that he heard 2 to 3 shots. And those were the 2 to 3 shots that were killing Aaron Feiss. The other part of the perjury is that him saying that he didn't see 5 children coming out of the building 12. Now, there's another witness that says that they did see 5 children leaving building 12. He says he did not see them. I don't know how you can make that perjury when, who can say what he saw? Only he can say what he saw. And if he didn't see it, he didn't see it. He was pretty busy at that point. He's monitoring 2 radios, school radio, the police radio, that he knows is not going to work if he's inside a building somewhere. So he's actually out in the open, exposing himself to possible gunfire so he can talk on the daggum radio and get radio reception. But the other thing they pointed out about the radios that I thought was really interesting is that apart from the, reception issue with that radio, when it failed, it didn't fail until after Nicholas Cruz was long gone from that building. And officers, more and more traffic came on that radio. That's when the radio really started to fail. By then, it was too late. So the defense points out that saying it so doesn't make it so. That was his theme. So he didn't know where the shooter was. That's, plain and simple. He didn't know where the shooter was. And he pointed out how there were multiple witnesses. Some people thought it was coming from the football field. Some people thought it was, somewhere around the 12 or 1300 building. Someone said it was outside the building. Someone said it was on the roof. Someone said it was the gym. I mean, people just did not know where these sounds were coming from. So had he entered the building, the defense points out that in order for him to get up to the first floor, he would have had to first clear in order for him to get up to the third floor, he would have had to first clear the first floor, then the second floor, and then the third floor, something that took SWAT over 30 minutes to do. He would have had to done it in 66 seconds in order to disrupt Nicholas Cruz. Again, very critical of this officer Medina, whose duty, according to the prosecution, is just to observe and report. Well, he said over the school radio that he saw a suspicious person entering the 1200 building. And no one knows if Scot Peterson heard that. At the time that transmission came across, Scott Peterson was charging his school radio, and he was busy doing something in the office. So I don't know that he necessarily heard that transmission, but when he gets on the golf cart and Medina drops him off in front of the 1200 building, did they have a conversation? Did Medina say to him, hey, it's Nicholas Cruz, or hey, it's a suspicious person. This is the door that he went into. I don't know if he passed along that information. The defense talked about how, there was over 70 shell casings on the third floor, and the prosecution pointed out that, how could they only hear 2 to 3 shots if there were over 70 shell casings on the floor? Well, there were no witnesses that they said they heard anywhere near 70 shots. So that's a moot point. Then the defense went on to talk about how all these different officers, both Broward sheriffs and Coral Springs officers, that had all of the intel that still did not enter that building. Even the guy that was out watering the baseball field, who had all of this intelligence, did not enter that building. He talked about how the 911 calls, the prosecution pointed out during their closings that the person with the intel was Scott Peterson. He was the intel. And the defense countered that by saying, the person with the best intel, the people with the best intel, were those children that were calling 911 inside of that building. And it was going to Coral Springs, and it was not being relayed to the Broward Sheriff's Office. So Scott did not have that information. That was the best intel right there. So one of the themes that the defense had was that Scott Peterson was being sacrificed. And he even at one point called this a selective prosecution. There were failures of the radio, failures of the brass that, would have come to light had they not shifted the focus to Scott Peterson. He talked about that there was no debriefing, that's what should have been done following this. The brass should have held a debriefing to find out where the failures were. Nobody ever did that. I was writing my notes while I was driving. Look, I was using my gnome. It says, just a girl who loves gnomes in my book. So we talked about how there's a pronounced echo in that area. What all the witnesses, different witnesses said, that it was difficult to monitor 2 radios. He pointed out that the kids that were on the third floor, they didn't hear the gunshots that were happening on the first and second floor. Over 6 on the second floor and 61 on the first floor. They didn't hear the shots until Nicholas Cruz was in the stairwell confronting them. So actually, when he called this a selective prosecution, in other words, being critical of the prosecutors, the prosecutor jumped up for one of her 5 to 6 times that she interrupted his closing arguments, which was a record actually for... Usually, you just don't disrupt somebody's closing argument, because the judge is just going to tell the jurors to, that it's not evidence. What they're saying is not evidence. Rely on your own memory. If what they're saying is different than what you think you heard, go by what you heard. So why interrupt him? But she kept interrupting him, but she did not like that he called this a selective prosecution. And at that point, the judge called a sidebar. I'm gathering that he was admonished for doing that. But it's true. It's a selective prosecution. If you're arguing that someone's duty is to protect and serve, and that makes you responsible for the welfare of everybody that you're protecting and serving, well, why isn't Congress being charged, for failing to enact gun laws? I don't know. That's just my opinion. Okay. Hindsight is 2020. I'm just kind of reading my notes here. He called Nicholas Cruz the monster. Once he finished his closings, and he finished because he ran out of time, he asked the judge for additional time. And the judge said no. So once the jury left, he sent the jury to lunch and said that the rebuttal by the prosecution would be after lunch. So once the jury had left the room, the defense lawyer asked for 20 more minutes to finish up his closing arguments. And the judge said, no, I have to judge whether you used your time wisely in order to give you more time. And I don't think you used your time wisely. Wow. I can't believe he said that. So, there you have it. There's his appeal for ineffective assistance of counsel. It's terrible, terrible. So he didn't give him additional time. So then the male prosecutor got up and pretty much reiterated what had already been said by the female prosecutor, that the mere presence of this uniformed officer would have disrupted Nicholas Cruz and would have saved the lives of everybody on the third floor. I don't believe that. I think Scot Peterson would have ran to his death. So the judge spent probably an hour reading these jury charges. By the end, I think everybody had culpable negligence memorized. So the jury's going to have to find that Scot Peterson acted with a course of conduct that he knew would or was likely to cause great bodily harm or injury to these children. And they're going to have to find that he was a caregiver. Was he another person who was responsible for the welfare of all those children? They're going to have to answer yes in order to find all of the elements of child neglect. They can find a lesser included offense of culpable negligence if they don't find the child neglect. So, and one of the things I learned here, first of all, there were only 6 jurors. I thought there were 12 jurors. So apparently in Florida, there's only 12 jurors on death penalty cases. I did not know that. I don't know if that's new since I practiced law there. But 6 jurors for this case. But I did civil law, and it was always 6 jurors in a civil case. But in any case, 6 jurors. Right before lunch, right when they came back from lunch, there was an issue with one of the jurors. He or she disclosed that she had some kind of involvement in the penalty phase of the Nicholas Cruz trial. So that rather than dismiss her, they made her one of the alternates. So when the judge was finished with the instructions, which was not till 4:30 in the afternoon, she was one of the persons that he dismissed as an alternate. They had 4 alternates, so he dismissed the 4 alternates with instructions that they were still jurors until the verdict was rendered. But they could go home, and he would call them and let them know when the case was over. And at that point, they could talk about the case. The other thing that I was not aware of was that one of the children, because there's 3 culpable negligence charges for the adults, and one of the children was 18. So he was charged with culpable negligence for Scott Beagle, the teacher, Stacy Lapel, who was a teacher, and Meadow Pollock. Now, Stacy Lapel did not die, but she was injured. So Meadow Pollock was 18 at the time of these events. So I don't know, guys. What do you guys think? Guilty, not guilty? So the jury deliberated. The judge said he was going to let them deliberate till 6 p.m. So obviously they did not reach a verdict by 6 p.m. So they're resuming their deliberations today, and I'll let you know what the verdict is when it comes through. We're just kind of hanging out here today after we have breakfast. And maybe, or maybe I'm not dyeing my hair pink. We shall see. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, everybody. Bye.